Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Wherever you are in the world, I wish you peace, and I really hope this helps you out. Now, the title of this video is the Kundalini process. The Kundalini process of awakening. And what I've done is I have translated part of my biography into 4 components, 4 parts for a map. There's 4 steps, it's 4 levels. But before I break everything down and explain all of that, I will just give you a few disclaimers, legal qualifiers as well. First of all, this is not professional medical advice. I got my notes right in front of me, by the way. This is, of course, primarily stimulation, entertainment, and merely food for thought. I am relaying a shortened and oversimplified version of my very own personal experiences into something like a map form or a chronological order that is somewhat understandable conceptually. It took me a very long time to place my experiences, as in probably the only first step is really I sort of knew what was going on, but I was a little bit surprised. But with all of the other steps, I would say they were unexpected. Didn't expect them at all. And difficult to understand, difficult to attain. So we'll get into that. Also, so I said, so what were they? What's going on? What language can I use for them? Because I didn't have any language to use, especially for those steps 2 to 4. And is the language that I use accurate? Is the language that I'm seeing other people use, is that accurate? Are they aligning? As I said here, does this language match and align with the language being employed in the overall spiritual community or in all the multiple traditions that go over this form of awakening, right? Third disclaimer, this probably only make vague conceptual sense if you're still inside the ego to a large extent. Don't worry, I am too. This is basically, I'm defining ego as an illusory character projection of who you are that's sort of infused into your sense of being and emotion right now. But what we want to do is we want to disorientate that, release that, empty that, explode it outwardly, which is sort of echoing the final step. And then there's one last 4th disclaimer I want to mention here. None of this is canonical or conventional or traditional or in a traditional order. It's just my process, my observations. Doesn't have to be repeated, doesn't have to be replicated, doesn't have to be practiced. This is all, as I said earlier, merely food for thought for you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through the Kundalini process, starting at the first step, this first division. I've broken this down into the first component, all the way to the last one. Starting with number 1, which is really the easiest stage that almost anyone can do if you're interested. So I say here this is stage 1. Stage 1 is purely external, and this is what is called prana-awareness. Prana is, I think it's linguistically, from memory, it's defined as filling or breathing. But similarly to, reminds me of my Christian background, when we use the Greek word pneuma or the Hebrew term ruach, it's referring to breath, but the word is often used to refer to spirit because the spirit is very subtle. The spirit is the breath of the universe, the life force of the universe, the energy of the universe, the life force of the universe. So there's something inherently, innately alive about prana. There's this aliveness property that it possesses. So you may not have experienced that immediately, whether directly or indirectly, but you could probably think of times in your life where you're sort of within the dome of that energy, especially if you've been to church or been traveling or been in a concert and everyone's holding up candles, or you've been into like I don't know, you could be Islamic Sufi traditions. Like there's all kinds of way that you can temporarily access this sort of energy, but most people don't want to spend time alone and just choose to self-isolate and meditate, or meditate in groups for that matter. So with regard to this prana awareness, the first, I say here, practice 1. So I say this can be experienced with very basic meditation. But I said, but the awareness of it does build over time. So it takes consistently. You can't just sit down for like 30 minutes or 60 minutes and just assume that the very first time that you try, you're going to sense it, perceive it, or feel it. You can't just assume that. You have to build this up slowly over time. Use discipline, use consistency. Do this for a month, do this 2 months, 3 months, and you'll be able to sense this very subtle life force energy around really any part of your body. If you need a resource to sort of get you kickstarted into the most basic forms of meditation, I could recommend Eckhart Tolle, as I mentioned earlier. That's the very first source I began with. Now, that's the first practice that you can do. The second practice goes a little bit beyond this. So I started exploring meditations in general, that is plural, meditations. So I mentioned here releasing forms of meditations, relaxation meditations, gratitude meditations, love meditations, shadow meditations. I said it's important that you sense this beingness in yourself, also seeing it, feeling it in others, but also you kind of have to induce it in yourself, learn to induce it over yourself to have a small amount of control or a handle over directing the prana energy, the life energy, the energy force over yourself. So this is the second step. You want to basically not just feel it and not just sense it, but to be able to be consumed and absorbed into it and sort of direct it in specific parts of your body. Relax yourself, place it over you, so to speak. Now, I did have one final practice, the third practice for this prana awareness stage. I called it here self-inquiry because that's a common term in the spiritual nation, the spiritual community. I mentioned here that the version of this that my friend and I came up with was actually accidental. I didn't actually mean to employ self-inquiry, but it just so happened that it came out that way. And as I mentioned here, it eventually resulted in the big bang of my activation, which is stage 2, my Kundalini activation. So what I mentioned in stage 2 here is, let me see what I said. I said stage 2. I mentioned stage 1, internal meditative practices and activities result in the infusion of the external prana, causing or meeting with the internal Kundalini activation. So basically, in a sense, you've utilized the energy out there in the world. Now, in step 1, you were sort of learning to cover yourself in this energy, relax yourself in this energy, melt and blend into this energy and feel it and sense it all over you. So you're getting pretty good at that, and you can do that consistently. And then while you're doing some self-inquiry, that energy, especially if it's sometimes it can just rise up organically because you don't necessarily have to practice all the time because it becomes so natural, it becomes so organic that it can sort of rise up or become less dormant when you're doing this process of self-inquiry. You go through it and something snaps. You want something to snap. If, of course, again, I have to use the disclaimer here. I have to say this can be very dangerous if you don't have traditional authority supporting you, guiding you. So doing this by yourself can result in bad things, especially if you're a very wounded or trauma person, a person with mental illness and other issues. So I'm not necessarily advocating that you do that. I'm just explaining that was part of my experience. That's what I did. So yeah, then you get to the point of Kundalini activation, and I just want to explain what do I mean by Kundalini activation. So we have step 1, prana-awareness, step 2, Kundalini activation. So what's the outcome of this? So those were the 3 steps that led me into a Kundalini activation. So firstly, the first outcome is 1 or more of your chakra centers open. In my case, I can vividly remember 1 opening. It was my crown. Alright, but I don't think that's the case for everyone, but that's my personal account. And it can cause an experience unlike anything you have ever experienced or had in your life before. Common symptoms: you may feel enlightened, you could feel awoken, you may even feel like you have superpowers or you're like a deity. Also, this opening, especially if it's a crown, but it can happen again with other chakra centers, it will have different effects on people around you. Some people won't sense it at all. Some people won't feel it at all. Some people won't pick it up on all. They just have no sensitivity to that sort of energy. But the people who are sensitive to that energy, you're like, wait, why is that person acting that way? Like, that person's acting really strangely. Why is that person convulsing? Why is that person like? There's different, very vast effects. This may scare you. Just being honest. I mean, this external effect on the world that it has around you could scare you or cause anxiety or fear in you to some degree. You might end up feeling uncomfortable. You might even feel ending up like, oh, I don't want to go to work, or I don't want to go to university for some time until this thing settles down or dies down. Second outcome. So when this happens, at first you probably won't know what chakras are. You won't know the term Kundalini. I never knew any of that stuff. You have questions. You'll probably Google symptoms and you'll try to find out what's occurring. So that was one of the outcomes for me personally. Then I got outcome 3, the third one. All of your chakra centers will not be simultaneously opened. It is most likely you won't even understand that one of them is open, which is true. I knew I could feel something from up there coming down my back, but I didn't know it was called a chakra at the time. And I didn't know that there was like a systematic account of what's called Kundalini or prana. But despite not knowing that, because 1 or 2 or however many are now open, you will inevitably experience probably something different, something unique, or maybe even something alien or something mystical to your typical mundane existence. As I said in the 4th outcome, eventually your powers or your realization of enlightenment, it does die down, and you realize that you're still a human being, although you might feel a little surreal, you might still feel a little eerie, and even when it does die down, you'll probably still feel to some extent like you're special. You'll still feel to some extent that you may even be divine. Right, so that is the last outcome of the activation. Now, the stage 3 here, I called it Banish the Dark Night, Kundalini-Chakra Releasing. And I wonder what I called it in the title. Oh yes, I did call it Kundalini-Chakra Releasing. Anyway, the first outcome, I say, Dark Night of the Soul. Now that things have settled down, you realize, At least you realize that you're not as great as you were before. Maybe you're not the God man. Maybe you're not a superhero, an empowered superhero that you thought you were. You also may end up noticing at this point, because the other chakras have not opened or released, that you are in a certain amount of pain. So it gets very confusing at this point, or astounding is another word, and wondering or wonderful. So for example, I say here, while you may be experiencing streams of like beautiful energy or earthly energy, it depends on what chakra is open, from a recently opened chakra center, you may also experience an enhanced awareness of pain or suffering stemming from the multiple chakra energy centers around your body that are still wounded and closed and not open and released. And this is called, this is like a dormant version of the dark night of the soul. So the dormant version, you will have that hyper sense or enhanced sense and awareness of experiencing more pain from some places eventually. Again, this is not all immediately. It does take time. Things have to die down and you'll start feeling more pain. And then the potency of the strong, beautiful energy will die down a little bit. So now you'll have all sorts of conflicting emotions or feelings and different streams of energy. Some might cause pleasure, some might cause pain. It also depends how wounded your chakra body is. I said here, but the peak of your dark night, so this is when the dark night is less dormant, it's more intense, can get very intense, and you can feel like you're dying, or like you want to go to a hospital, or you want to go to a mental facility, or a counselor, or a therapist, a healer. It could result in you lots of different things occurring, but also different potential outcomes. I also say, and this is a brutal one, the completion of your dark night can take anything from weeks to months to years. And I said, this is completed via, and then practice one, arising and passing. So I preface this, I say this is where you will pursue a path. I say, of course, you may follow multiple paths or techniques or methods, and you may switch between some and like sort of stack upon paths and leave one and join another. There's different explorers and searchers will sort of have different results and outcomes here. I said mention some options are that you join a specific tradition. So I say, for example, you may want to join a formal tradition like the Buddhist tradition of Mahayana or Vajrayana, or you may want to join a Hindu tantric system. I say you could also join something a little less formal or traditional, but would still sort of incorporate and integrate some of the practices from those traditions, or at least variations of those practices, such as Kundalini yogic practices or other practices that involve elevating and rising or releasing your internal chakra Kundalini energy. There are Western practices that include some or all of this. I do mention some. I mention like, so there's shadow. You can find many coaches who do shadow work, trauma therapy. Osho had a very interesting meditation where he does sort of like a shaking method and a dancing method. And I also do mention here the reason why some people might not like the Western approach to all this thing, or even some non-Western approaches, is that, of course, they violate tradition, and that they combine different elements of distinct traditions. So this could be argued to be eloquent and beautiful, sort of like a synchronicity or a synthesis, or it could be viewed as syncretic, and some things maybe don't belong and the pieces of the puzzle become confusing. Everyone has different ideas about this, but the point is to select or choose a practice, stick with it, see if you get results, and then move on if you don't. Practice 2, And then I mentioned here, this is where I personally became exclusivistic for quite some time, because I tried many methods, but only the therapeutic method I discover, which has now evolved over time, I mentioned here in brackets, has given me the most success via the most amount of efficiency. And let me pause right here from reading a little bit and mention here one of my theories. So this is just, again, this is not like gospel or something. This is just a working or operating theory. So you could have like dark energy, and when I say dark energy, I don't mean like evil energy or something like that. When I say dark energy, I mean invisible energy. That's what dark here means. It means invisible, like not seen by the ordinary human or the average eye, at least without telescopes or whatever equipment we need to see dark energy, right? And then, so that's what I identify with prana on the scientific level. Again, this is just speculation. This is not a fact. It's just a running model I'm working with, right? And then you have dark matter. And what I'm saying is, as you use dark energy to tamper with dark matter, which is what I refer to, again, this is infusing spirituality and science a little too much for some people. It's a fallacy called scientism. So it's not gospel, but it's just a working theory, right? And I would equate this dark matter body as your soul. That's your soul, right? And your physical body that you can see, that's the body of light matter. That's the visible body. That's the visible. You can actually see it. So because those two become infused and connected, with my method, you can now do your release work. You can do your shadow work. You can do your trauma work. You can do your tantric work, your yogic work, whatever method you want to use. In my case, it's more of like at least initially, it was a therapeutic system, and it has a direct connection. And you know empirically, as a fact, that the dark energy body there's some things being released. You can feel it as it goes. Two common signs or symptoms that this actually occurs, and you know it for an empirical fact from your own direct experience, is 1, you cry, or 2, you laugh. So it could be 1 or 2. Those are the most common symptoms. If something has been released, it's because usually you've seen such a great insight and it's made you cry, or it's made you laugh because of how absurd it is. And that is an actual example of an epiphany, of an insight, of a click, where it's like there's been a direct effect on your body and something has been released and you've seen some truth. All right? So that's an example of that. Practice 3... I mentioned one final method which also came about accidentally, but this led to my psychosis, my hospitalization and stuff, so I don't necessarily recommend this as a disclaimer once again. But I was in a state of like sleeplessness. I was just constantly infused with meditation and prayer, and eventually I found out like the sort of chakra sound therapy, which was very interesting, had a profound effect on me as well. A very intense cleansing or cleaning of your energy can have very intense side effects or symptoms. You in this position of like, it could be mania, it could be psychosis, it could be a number of different mental situations going on here. I said you'll access what appears to be like a universal intelligence or a divine intelligence. But what will happen is your dark energy body, which is not being fully cleansed and clear, we call it the wounded self or the small self or the old self. There's different words, but it's basically the lower self. It will distort a lot. It will distort your perception. It will distort your cognitive ability to perceive. And as I mentioned here, you may end up in very bad places. And I don't just mean something like therapy or counseling or hospitalization. I mean like internal bad places where there's just like a lot of suffering. I said in this phase, it is again common to become delusional, end up in hospital therapy, believe you are a prophet, believe you are a God man, believe you're a son of God, become, here's some negative qualities. You could become hyper paranoid and anxious. You could become very extra cynical compared to usual. You think like you could, the world could be like sinister, have like a sinister plot, so you're prone to accepting a lot of conspiracy theories, and weaving all together all this grand narrative of meaning. So you definitely feel a strong sense of purpose. You won't feel anything as accidental, and you won't feel anything as meaningless in this stage of it. A lot of your dormant mental health problems will rise to the surface, or they'll be accentuated. So that is like a part of the process that happened to me. That was the result of accidental practices that I had no intention. I didn't know where they would lead me or where they would take me. And then the second outcome, I said that you could be in the state for a long time. I said, or you could be in the state and out of the state off and on for a long time. But I also said, but this can also settle. Just like the other state settled, the original activation settled, this state can also settle. Let's call it the superpowered but delusional state. And then I said, eventually when it does settle, after the settling, much later after the settling, so a few months after, probably like maybe 4 months, 5 months, something like that, I said, I noticed while I had experienced, in my own case, psychosis, that something had awoken or risen behind the psychosis. And no one really, because everyone really thinks this is just associated with mental illness, but no one ever really thinks, well, what insights can we garner from mental illness? Like, what access to reality do mentally ill people have that maybe ordinary people lack? No one ever asked those sorts of questions, but that was something that actually happened. And I figured out, there is, even though mentally ill people have some level of delirium and delusion, that they have insights that ordinary people don't have because they have additional cognitive access to dimensions, states of reality that people don't usually suspect or receive. I said here, it was a real proper empirical access, this thing that came with the psychosis, to some form of universal intelligence. I said, although I don't just get to just access its power whenever, at least anymore, during psychosis it feels like you do access it quite commonly and frequently. I said, I now know that the real substantial effect was a connection of some kind with everything, with all things, in the sense of oneness. Then I said, however, I couldn't quite properly grasp this connection, because even though on the intuitive level I was now connected with everything in the form in a grand sense of oneness, this connection, it felt elusive and vague because of other things going on during this dark night of the shadow. I said, also said it seemed to disappear once I calmed down, but then I said, but it arose randomly, without expectation, and for small periods after it had calmed down. So it did sort of come up and down and do random shit, but it wasn't that often. It wasn't that common. But then here's the most important part, I think, or at least one of the most important parts. I said here, this is a side tangent about general awakening, more applicable here. So general awakening encompasses all awakening. I say this activated connection that came from the psychosis, I said it eventually turned into equanimity, which is, of course, known in the spiritual circles as a precursor to stream entry, which is what pretty much everyone means when they say awakening. So that's the default go-to meaning of awakening, is stream entry. Now, I'm not going to go over stream entry in this video, but you will, if you're already familiar with that concept, you will see what I'm about to say has a relationship to that. I say, how to do this. I say, the practice here is that when you're mentally ill or you have many cognitive distortions, you're emotionally wounded and distraught, you don't really know how to focus this connection that you've activated with awareness and meditation as methods and techniques. But I say, but if you recalibrate this connection, especially when you sense it either arising organically or via meditation releasing practices, you can calibrate or redirect it into a universal sense of self. I said, this is a bizarre stage of feeling empty or emptifying yourself in some sense. But by the way, that's up here where that takes place. That's not in your lower chakra. Again, this is a different form of awakening. This is more like an intuitive form of awakening of sight and vision, but it's not your Kundalini awakening in this case. I say that because this is the dark night of the soul, right? And in this phase where something else has activated that is connected to another form of awakening, this thing, whatever it is, if you focus it and direct it and use it in terms of attention and awareness, you start to feel the structure of your ego and your thoughts, at least in the head area, emptifies yourself in some sense. As I said eventually leading into stream entry. I say, if you can access stream entry, the final phase of... this becomes a little bit more relevant to the topic of the video next. I said, if you can access stream entry, the final phase of Kundalini awakening will blow by. It will be much easier. It will be automatic. It'll be less lengthy, although it will still be very intense. Talking about the dark night of the soul there. Now, when you have this part, this head, this self in the head that's emptying, the precursor to stream entry in the spiritual circles that I've been reading is called Equanimity. And Daniel Ingram provides a description that I want to elaborate on from my own personal experience, but I couldn't believe how he nailed it very well. He said, it feels cool, it feels spacious, flowy, naturalness. I'm okay, why was I freaking out? Everything is fine, I'm good, I'm more than good. Then he says, flowy, divine interconnection. He says, subtle emptiness of everything. And I'll come back to this shortly. He says, natural dance unfolding casually. Then he says, the basic thing is openness, expansiveness, inclusion. He says, everything can flow and synchronize together and disappear. And the last ones particularly, I relate to everything here, but these last ones in particular, subtle emptiness of everything. The basic thing is openness, expansiveness, inclusion, and everything can flow and synchronize together and disappear. That's particularly, I resonate with that one. Subtle emptiness of everything. And this one most of all, natural dance unfolding causally. So I'm going to give you my view of this, or my experience of this, my perception and interpretation of this. So earlier I mentioned my concept of prana, which I view, again, this is just a framework, as dark energy, invisible energy, and then you have your body, etc. That's light matter, and then you have the unseen parts of your body, your soul, which is dark matter, right? And below, in my chakra centers, which I've sort of in that process of before the dark night of the soul became more intense, I was sort of gradually gaining awareness of one more additional chakra at a time, and then learning how to release using a similar or the same identical technique on every chakra, right? So the pain of those chakras is still there. But when you enter this thing called equanimity, what happens is I believe that, I could be wrong, but this is the chakra of the third eye, and any wounds that it has, any sort of dark energy, dark matter, sort of infused projections and character into your ego. What happens when you enter that equanimity, which is similarly as an echo of stream entry, is that the infusion of the darkness or the negativity leaves, and the good stuff remains. So then your third eye sees your wisdom eye, and they're sort of covered in a bubble. And in this bubble, this is where, because of the focus, the attention, the awareness, and the meditation, where you can sort of look out into the world now, and the character or the ego of what is in your head is gone. Like, there's no emotional intensity to anything that you're thinking anymore. It's like you're not the same thing as the thought. You're not one with the thought. It's like the thought just emerges and pops up, and it's not you. There's no sense of infusion or character into the thought. The thought is completely neutral. Even if it's a negative thought or a positive thought or a critical thought, there's no emotional intensity behind it. There's no dark energy. There's no dark matter. There's nothing. It's just purely like another sensation, kind of like, I don't know, let's say you're you're taking toilet paper off the roll. It's kind of like that. Like, it's not negative, it's not positive, it's purely neutral. And then the next thing that happens in this state of equanimity, which I already knew was something like stream entry. As soon as I saw it, I understood that, because I don't have it permanently yet, but I understood that it could be permanent, and there could be a grander version of it. I really understood that almost immediately when I entered. Then what it does is, then the bubble covers your head, but then it's sort of this bubble of connection and wisdom eye, and then it comes down over your lower chakra centers, and then it starts doing what is described in stream entry. It starts releasing your lower chakras automatically on autopilot. It does it for you. And in addition, there is no emotional intensity or negativity. Again, it's the same like your thoughts. It's the same like the toilet paper analogy. It just releases, but now when it releases, you don't feel the dark night of the soul like before. When it releases, it's not like agony. It's not like misery. It's like another thought popping up. It's like a release. It's like almost just a pure physical process without any positive or negative connotation. So, again, that's very resembles stream entry a lot. And then the other important thing to note is, when you're in the state of equanimity, which is similar to stream entry, your perception, because everything becomes neutral, because there's no negative energy or bad infusions or intensities of thoughts or releasing. Like, releasing is not even a bad thing anyway, because releasing often feels very painful when you release. But there's nothing. It's nothing like that. And then, so the character in your head leaves, and then the feelings in your gut and your solar and your heart and your root, that all leaves. It's all gone. So there's no like negative characterizations or feelings of sensations. It's all neutral. And then you start to see the world of sensations purely as just sensations, without the character in your mind. Now, there is you do fluctuate in and out sometimes between a sense of self and a smaller sense of self. Like, at the end, there is still a small sense of self, but there's no attachments to it. There's no like big. Nothing is a big deal anymore, And the other thing is everything that is rising in your field of perception and your vision of the world is completely. There's no judgment, there's no attachment, and there's no feeling that it's you or that it's part of you. There's no feeling that it's happening to a character, in the sense is like the world is against the character, or the character is a victim of the world, or anything like that. It's all purely neutral, and it's all as if there's no distinction between me and it. So it's happening neutrally in that sense. And then I've written a stage 4. Stage 4, yeah. Stage 4, as I mentioned here, is both internal, external. I call it a Kundalini-Explosion. This is a full-blown Kundalini awakening. I say here, the Kundalini process is complete. Some people, everyone describes this slightly differently, but there does seem to be common themes and thematic patterns. But basically, all wounds in your chakra energy centers are cleared and cleansed. They're released. The energy is arising from the back of the spine all the way to the top of the crown, explodes outwardly, resulting in a total inversion of the self, or the death of the what's it called, the lower self, which was made up by these low-bound chakra energy centers. Now, I haven't had a Kundalini awakening yet. I believe I'm getting closer and closer to stream entry, because there are certain levels of equanimity that I have to follow through in the process. But I hopefully a lot of this has been somewhat useful or helpful as food for thought for everyone to contemplate on. Anyway, I'll see you in the next vid, guys. Thanks for watching.